So this is a letter, an open letter to Jon Atack. So, dear Mr. Atack, I'm writing concerning some statements you made about ex-Scientologists in your foreword in Chris Shelton's just published book, Scientology A to Xenu. I am assuming you wrote what was published. There is considerable disinformation in the book, and while presenting as critical of L. Ron Hubbard, Scientology, Scientologists, and their collaborators, it actually serves their antisocial purposes in key areas and ways. I will take these up with Mr. Shelton over the next few days. Right now, I will only address a few things from your foreword. You write, quote, I first heard about Chris Shelton in 2013 when he began blogging at the Underground Bunker. I was pleasantly surprised to find someone who had survived such a profound involvement and managed to dig himself out. Believe me, it is highly unusual. More usually, former members spend years embroiled in the halfway house of the self-styled independent movement until some external event triggers reflection. Of course, recovery from prolonged trauma does not happen overnight, and Chris has the humility to admit he has further to travel, as do we all. But that very humility marks him out from most former members who retain their phony elite status implanted by the cult into its devotees. Unlike 99% of former Scientologists, Chris was prepared to consider other explanations and to leave the cage of phobias induced by Scientology, end quote. It is not clear what explanation of what exactly Mr. Shelton was considering when he became prepared to consider other explanations. You might be viewing Scientology as providing or being, for Scientologists, an explanation of human existence or the human condition or some such thing, for which there are other explanations. You might have an explanation for what you had in mind. You also, of course, could be seen to be writing that while a Scientologist, Mr. Shelton had an explanation for his Scientology-implanted phony elite status, and at some point after becoming an ex-Scientologist, he became prepared to consider other explanations for his phony elite status. In either case, or whatever the various explanations are that you had in mind, it has never been my experience that 99% of ex-Scientologists were not prepared to consider other ones themselves. I have not experienced any quantifiable percentage at all of ex-Scientologists who are not prepared to consider such or different explanations. Without searching out all the explanations Mr. Shelton has said he considered, I do not believe, and I challenge the notion, that ex-Scientologists in any large percentage were not prepared to consider virtually everything Mr. Shelton has said he has considered. I would have to examine a lot of facts, which are not immediately accessible, to confirm for myself your assertion about the ex-Scientologist class. What evidence do you have that, unlike Mr. Shelton, 99% of ex-Scientologists were unprepared to consider the explanations you say he was prepared to consider? And what evidence is there that any meaningful percentage of ex-Scientologists were unprepared to leave the cage of Scientology-induced phobias you say he was prepared to leave? Obviously, I consider your conclusion about ex-Scientologists erroneous. It also obviously denigrates the ex-Scientologist class and is worth getting to the bottom of and correcting. I disagree with your conclusion that most Scientologists retain the phony elite status that was implanted in them while Scientologists. I question the claim that it is Mr. Shelton's humility that marks him out from these ex-Scientologists. I can say from personal knowledge, which I have made available for some months, that after you had heard about him and apparently found him dug out and his humility remarkable, he treated me knowingly, arrogantly, indeed contemptuously. In doing so, he also was serving the Scientologists' inimical purposes. While he has not corrected the black propaganda record he made targeting me, I have also observed that he's generally remarkably unhumble in his public presentations. He, of course, has now put his humility with his corresponding arrogance and resultant hypocrisy into issue publicly. It is prominent in your foreword, which he published and, I would guess, he requested you to write. It is conceivable that you and I have different definitions or values for humility, and what could be the essence of arrogance to me might be ever so humble to you. Just going by the usual common definitions, however, what is your basis for construing Mr. Shelton's humility as so deep, profound, or clear to you that it marks him out from most ex-Scientologists? His book, as I noted, has made his humility or lack a possibly quite educational public issue. Contrasting this psychological trait with the same trait of other ex-Scientologists has also made the humility or arrogance of the whole class a public issue for educational purposes. So there is a good issue for a public debate. You write in your foreword, my friend Christian Zerko, who is surely as expert about cults as anyone else alive, has pointed out former Scientologists tend to be even more arrogant than escapees from other groups. Chris is a notable exception. He has no pretensions to guruhood nor any need to form his own cult of personality. He has done remarkable work thus far, and I have no doubt that he will make many more contributions beyond this exceptional book. I wrote to Mr. Zerko a week or so ago to have him confirm that he said what you attribute to him and what he based such a conclusion on. I have not heard back from him. In any case, I have not found Mr. Shelton at all a notable exception to other Scientologists regarding his level, quantity, or manifestation of arrogance. In fact, it is clear to me that an honest analysis of his public persona and communications and his handling of sincere questioners of his claims, as he did with me, will show that his arrogance or narcissism is a significant characteristic and a psychological concern, not a virtue. I do not mean that Mr. Shelton's arrogance or narcissism is a concern to him, but it should be a concern to people who might look to him for guidance or tout his humility. Perhaps you can provide whatever evidence you have that he is a, quote, notable exception to the claim you ascribe to Mr. Zerko that ex-Scientologists are notably more arrogant than escapees from other groups. You also write that Mr. Shelton, quote, is driven by the compassionate urge to help those who have been harmed by Scientology, end quote. I have never hidden, but have been very clear that I have been, and am being, harmed by the Scientologists and their collaborators. Yet Mr. Shelton has exhibited no urge whatsoever to help me when he could, but has shown a determination to help the Scientologists and their collaborators in harming me. Do you really believe that it was compassion that motivated him, after claiming to be free of Scientology, to publicly black PR me, shun me, not grant me credence, all in service of the Scientologists' malevolent purposes? I look forward to hearing your answers to my questions and your thoughts on the humility and arrogance issue generally, psychologically or socially, from your perspective. Yours frankly, Jerry Armstrong.